So Decidueye took me the longest to make sets for because I really expected this Pokemon to be a lot different than how its stats actually turned out to be. Decidueye's attack is reasonably high at 107. Its special attack is also high enough at base 100. It's very average and good to set up and sweep with as well. However, its speed lets it down so much. When everyone saw this Pokemon as a little Rowlet and even as a Dartrix, I think most people assumed that he would be the fast starter of this generation. And unfortunately he is, but 70 speed, it just happens to be the fastest speed of any starter, not counting starters that aren't fully evolved, such as Torracat. As far as his other stats go, his bulk is lacking a bit because it's 78 and 75 in defense. He actually doesn't gain any bulk at all when he evolves from Dartrix. His special defense does go up considerably to be base 100, which means he could run something like an assault vest to some success, but with that speed it just lets him down, especially since he has 5 weaknesses, most of which are very common in the meta. His resistances, however, do help him out some, with water and electric being very good resistances to have because that's a common dual type to run on a lot of different Pokemon. And the normal and fighting immunities are never a bad thing, as well as the ground resistance. As far as abilities go, Long Reach is currently not available, but I could see Long Reach being very useful on the more physical sets for this Pokemon, because what it does is it just means you don't make contact with your opponent at all. Which means you don't take damage from Iron Barbs, you don't take damage from Rough Skin, Rocky Helmet, you don't get burned by Flame Body, you don't get paralyzed by static, and etc. You don't get affected by Effect Spore. It's really good for situations in which you'd be hitting your opponent and risking damaging or statusing yourself, which is pretty useful. Overgrow's a decent ability, but your low speed means that you'll probably only get one hit off with your now superpowered grass type attack before you get knocked out. Now the first set I had for this Pokemon was a Scarf set, because even though 70 base speed isn't the best, it still means you can outspeed most things if you're running max speed and a Choice Scarf. So you could run either Adamant or Jolly. I think Jolly is the best because that way you even outspeed some of the highest speed Pokemon in the game right now. You'd run max attack, max speed of course, and a little bit in your defense. You could run that anywhere you really wanted. And then your main moves, I think this is pretty solid for 4 moves. You'd run U-turn to pivot out and get a good switch in on your opponent. Spirit Shackle for your strongest ghost type move, stab. Leaf Blade for your strongest grass type stab. And Brave Bird for really good flying coverage that your opponent may not expect from you. Now, what Spirit Shackle does is it does trap your opponent in, so if they decide to stay in, expecting you to U-turn, say the second time you come in, then suddenly they might be stuck in with a Pokemon that they really don't want to be in against your Decidueye. Other moves you could run on this Pokemon, you could run Shadow Claw. You do lose a bit of damage from the Spirit Shackle, but you gain a chance to critical hit. You could run Sucker Punch, although Sucker Punch on a Scarfer really isn't that necessary. You could run Low Sweep, Smackdown, and Steel Wing as well, but these are very specific coverage moves that aren't very good on their own, and should only really be run if you desperately need that extra coverage, or if you want to catch your opponent off guard. The second set I have is a trapping set, and this is more of a bulky set where you'd run either Leftovers, a Citrus Berry, or one of the new berries that heal you by half when you're below 1/4 of your health. You'd max out your special defense with Careful Nature, but you'd also run investment in either special defense or defense. It really depends on what you'd prefer. I normally like to split my defenses, that way I can take hits evenly on both sides. You also run a little in speed just to catch those things that might be speed creeping base 70 Pokemon. Now, I wish that Spirit Shackle and Baton Pass work like you might think it would, but unfortunately that's not the case. So my original plan for this set was to Spirit Shackle your opponent and trap in something, perhaps Celesteela, Toxapex, something that has much less offensive presence than it does defensive. Then you could Baton Pass and your opponent would still be trapped. Unfortunately, it has not worked like this in a few generations, and As such, this set is not as effective, but it still could be useful for your Decidueye itself. So the main idea is to Spirit Shackle your opponent in, Toxic them, and then weaken them or Baton Pass into something that can take the hits better. And the Spirit Shackle, while it may not transfer, you could also run Protect to take hits before you Baton Pass and switch, or you could just hard switch. It really doesn't matter. But I thought Baton Pass was a good option because you could get an advantage on your opponent if they expect you to Spirit Shackle, and you could switch anyway. But it could be alternated with U-turn as well. For your last move, I would choose Synthesis because it does heal you quite a bit, and Sun can be common depending on how many people decide to run Torkoal. But Leaf Blade is a good coverage move if you prefer that. Now, as far as other utility moves go with Decidueye, Curse is a decent move because if you Spirit Shackle your opponent in and then Curse, especially against something that can't do any damage to you, like a Toxapex, then suddenly they're taking 25% a turn, plus if you added a Toxic to a Pokemon that can be Toxic, and they're not able to switch out because of the Spirit Shackle. Which means that this is one of the very few times that Curse could be useful on a Ghost type. You could also run setup moves and Baton Pass. The setup moves that are available to Decidueye are Swords Dance, Nasty Plot, and Workup. So really it doesn't get a lot of defensive setup, but it gets quite a bit of offensive setup that you could pass into things that may not have access to it otherwise, such as say Sharpedo. You could set up a Swords Dance, get a safe-ish Baton Pass into Sharpedo if you're slower, and then Protect for a speed boost, and suddenly you're double attack and +1 speed. You could also run Haze to prevent your opponent from setting up on your Decidueye if they had the opportunity to, and you could also nullify some Beast Boost in this way. You could run Defog to get rid of hazards, Light Screen to block special attacks, and Feather Dance to reduce your opponent's attack by 2, although Feather Dance really isn't seen that often. The last move I thought might be useful is Foresight. If you decided you didn't want the grass coverage at all, you could always run Foresight, and this would mean that your Spirit Shackle could even land on normal type opponents, trapping them in. The final set I have is a Sweeping Decidueye, and this set could be run either physically or specially, which is why there's so many slashes on the screen. And this set needs to be Life Orb to have maximum damage. You need to have a plus speed nature and reduce whichever offense you're not using. Max out your speed and your offense. You'd run either Nasty Plot, Swords Dance, or even Workup if you wanted to be a mixed attacker, but I wouldn't really recommend it for this Pokemon. So if you ran Nasty Plot, your main moves would probably be Energy Ball, Shadow Ball, and then Hidden Power to cover what you couldn't normally hit, perhaps Hidden Power Ice. And if you ran Swords Dance, then your 3 best moves would be Leaf Blade, Spirit Shackle, and Brave Bird, just to do as much damage as possible with all of your stab moves, and having that one extra move in the back. So overall, Decidueye does have quite a few different sets that it can run, although my favorite is the Scarfer set. I think it will definitely see the most use, especially if it does get its ability Long Reach at some point. But really, all 3 of the starters kind of surprised me with how slow they were, but that doesn't mean they're useless. They just take a little more effort to work with.